What is going on, everyone? It is your host, Samir Kosser, here for another exciting episode of Diary of a Sales Engineer. Today, we're on episode 11, and we're going to be talking about the partnership between the AE and SE. I got my co host here.
Ryan Kruger, and today we are joined with Brent Veit, who is a powerhouse sales leader known for scaling teams and driving growth, from leading Xanavoy's global digital transformations to helping Beyond Cloud Consulting become Oracle's most awarded partner. Brent's experience spans sales, marketing, and partnerships. Today, we're going to hear his insights on what it takes to win in today's market and how it is to work with sales engineering. And Brent, because we were chatting before this started, and I'm throwing this on you right
Oh
away, you
no.
told me you had a horror story for working with a sales engineer. So I want that to be the first thing we discuss today.
Yeah, and I should probably preface this with this sales engineer has like got me out of so many situations and has provided so much value that this was just like a drop in the bucket, but it was so extreme that it's hard not to bring up. So luckily it was an internal call with a partner and our champion. So no real stakeholders on the line, anyone who could like really be affected by the decision making and consequence of this. But we were having a conversation. You're talking to your sales engineer on Slack. How's it going? Hey, be right back, grabbing a drink of water, going to the washroom. So I got the going to the washroom Slack, and I said, yeah, no worries, like standard protocol, except for whatever reason, I don't know if he was taking the phone call from his phone. He brought his laptop with him, but it went quiet. And at that moment, we heard about 20 to 25 seconds of just someone going to the washroom. And the sweet champion, luckily, was just like, oh God, I think someone's getting a glass of water. And then that's when,
Oh
you
my
hear,
God.
oh, and then mute slams on and no one knows what to do. Everyone was kind of laughing. Uh, but sales engineers are my favorite people. So I'm excited for this.
Man, that is actually a great horror story. I feel like you heard about a lot of those things happening like right at the beginning of COVID as people were first getting introduced to this sort of virtual work style.
Sure.
People would be taking their laptop into the bathroom. Next thing you know, they'd be like throwing the mute on really fast. Wow, I can't imagine being in that situation. If you're out there listening, though, a good pro tip is to like double, triple, quadruple check if your mic is on. That would be the piece of advice I give there. But luckily, there were no stakeholders on the call. But I guess a good story that you have to hold over their head moving forward.
Yeah, it was awesome, honestly.
I mean, I've
Cool.
I've had some horror stories myself, and there's not that one, but there was one time I forgot to mute myself and said something that was not necessarily work appropriate. My my sales rep was very, very good at that, at disseminating that. Said something along the lines of like, "Why am I on this call?" And because I was like, "I don't know why I'm on this call. Like, I'm double booked. I could go somewhere else." Like, I was just a little frustrated. Forgot to mute. So we've all been there, and I feel like it's a rite of passage almost to learn how to properly mute yourself.
I feel like I think both those stories come from being overbooked. So, I mean, I have a question for you guys. Do you feel that with sales engineering being kind of a new position within the overall sales process, the sales team, the or go to market team, that we haven't figured out a good way to scale it or like a rule of thumb? Because usually I'm talking to two people that are sales engineers. It's like people who don't have enough work or people who are stretched so thin that like they're probably looking for new jobs as we go. But just kind of curious from your side.
I do think it's something that we haven't really figured out yet is how to actually scale sales engineering. And I think part of the challenge with that is the fact that there are like 40 different titles for this role. Sales engineer, solution consultant,
Yeah.
solution architect, sales consult. I mean, like it goes on and on and on. And yet every time I meet and talk with another SE or SC, what happens is they tell me about their role and I'm like, oh, okay, you're more involved on the implementation side. You're more involved in like the customer success side. Whereas, for me, I'm more involved on the pre-sale side and driving deals forward, driving revenue. And so I wish we would have a standardization of just like this title means you do X and this title means you do Y, because I do think it would help really define what those roles are. Otherwise, I think, what likely happens and the reason why it is a struggle to actually scale this role is you start basically putting someone in a box. You say, all right, I need you to actually do this and this versus just one of the two functions. And then they get stretched out really thin because not only are they focused on revenue generation, they're also focused on the implementation, the customer success side. And so
Yep.
that then becomes a major bandwidth challenge.
I think to add to that, I think that usually happens with like smaller companies, especially like startups when you have less than like 5 people SE organizations,
Sure.
10 people where you don't have a explicit delineation. But another thing is when you become like a good SE, every AE wants you to be on their deal.
It's true. Yeah.
And then it becomes like everyone wants to pull you on the deal, and you might have other SCs on the team. They might be equally as good, but they just haven't as many at bats. So like other AEs don't have that trust yet, especially if you're like a 10-year SC and you're the one that the AE's been working with since day one. It's going to be really hard for them to like transition to another one because you've built that trust. And so when you become like really good, you become very much desired because now, like from an AE perspective, your comp is quota based, right? You don't hit your number, you don't get paid. Like SCs, we have a little bit of variable comp, but we have a heavier base, and
Hmm.
so the incentive for an AE to like cherry pick the best SC, you're incentivized to work with the top one. Versus like for us, it doesn't necessarily like, yes, we would like to prefer to work with like the top AEs because it's more fun to close deals and whatnot, but our variable comp is less, so we have less at stake.
Interesting. Do you,
And that's a
well,
good call out too, Zamir, because something I do want to point out too is not only are you getting called on to do more deals, those reps then start to rely on you more for doing the little things. Hey, let's actually schedule a 30-minute KT to talk and strategize about this deal. I want to get your perspective. Hey, I actually need your help about this. They asked for a follow-up question. Can you help me do this? And then you start to have that happening across all of your reps, and then your bandwidth gets shortened. I mean, I will say like the most successful relationships that I have with my account executives are the one that sort of understand what the bandwidth looks like for you and can just pull you in and say, hey, let's get on a call for 15 minutes. I got 3 deals I'm going to run by you. They're going to happen over the next 5 days or the next 10 days. We can knock out all three or all five of them within the 15 minutes. Just quick, let me tell you what you need to hear so that way you're ready. I trust that you're going to take the information and get it to this place that we need to. Some deals require more strategy, of course, but some of them don't, meaning you can actually knock it out a lot faster versus just wasting the time with the formalities of, hey, how's your day going? Tell me about the weather. Tell me about how your weekend was, right? You can just get on call and say, hey, let's actually just knock this out. I know your schedule's busy.
yeah. And I think too, that kind of goes back to if you look at like the scale of an organization, if you really think about smaller point solutions or like a startup, small footprint of a company, you have BDRs who are finding leads if the account executives aren't really prospecting. And then really it never, that lead doesn't go to a traditional account executive that you would find on like a mid-market or corporate sized company for software. It would go to a sales engineer. Technically it would be positioned in the hands of a small team that knew how to close, how to negotiate, understood contract terms, but also understood the product. So I mean it makes sense that they would hire you guys because you're kind of a force multiplier of an account executive, because you have one account executive who can run lots of deals in that first model that I talked about, or you have one account executive who can quarterback a lot of moving pieces for a lot of deals, and then have a person like a sales engineer who can have the conversations that give credibility and help build rapport for the organization. I think at least that's kind of how I've tried to figure it out, because there is, like what you guys were talking about, a game of tippy toe of even what that role is organization to organization.
And I do think like something that you brought up here, and I'm really curious to see how this actually shapes out over the next few years, especially with the rise of different AI tools that are out there for the sales function specifically. But like we're already seeing AI be deployed to do things like those sort of like cold outreach and doing some cold calling, and that technology will continue to get better. Is when we have those things happen, I kind of see sales engineering shifting more into a kind of role that I would call like account engineering, where it really starts off at that discovery phase all the way through to closure of a deal. where then that account engineer would then talk to a solutions engineer or solutions architect on how to actually get that deal live. So you'd have really technical sellers passing along really technical information that actually gets passed off to then architect and implement it in the future. But I think for right now, I think like the very traditional business model is going to be what we continue to see for the next few years, because you do need people doing that kind of cold outreach, the relationship building, all of the emails and the coordination of the calendars back and forth. I mean, look, I mean, it's a partnership when we're talking about AE and SE. No deal gets done without the partnership in full harmony. I mean, I think that's super important, because if you can't find a way to actually work positively with your account executive, your account executive can't find a way to work positively with the sales engineer, no business is getting done. The more the two of you work better together, the likely you are for better outcomes when you're in a sales cycle.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I kind of want to.
So
Oh, go ahead,
go
Ron.
ahead, Samir.
This is just like as you were talking about, technology changing, AI being leveraged in cold calling and whatnot. From an account executive perspective, if you had the option of having almost like there's this new kind of phrase like the AI SE, which they can almost demo, like share screen and almost like a Hey Siri demo type of thing. Like, how would you, as an AE, how comfortable are you with having something like that? Or like, what's your reaction to that?
It's interesting because unless you really have a fully baked out solution, a really great product, it feels like the conversations you're having on a day-to-day basis, SC, prospect, account executive, as that moves forward, as you're building kind of a case for either a point solution or something a little more complex and comprehensive, it's a constant feedback loop. So unless you have like such a refined system where you understand every element and touch point of your go-to-market strategy, from having that initial conversation to walking them through and building trust with the product to getting signatures, I think it's going to be something that people strive to do, but it's going to be very hard to do, especially as complex or as you sell more complex products and offerings.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a good question for you too on that front. I mean, something that I've noticed particularly is that usually, like when I'm running deals with more successful account executives, I find that they do take the time to really learn the product more intimately than just sort of scratching the surface on it. What would your take be for account executives out there on actually getting your hands dirty to learn more about the product?
Yeah, because you bring up a good point where we kind of have two pathways into sales right now. BDR, which big companies have academies for, and then you have like the SC or SE Academy. I think personally, and this is going to be controversial, but I think everyone should try to be a product expert to some degree. Like for example, NetSuite. Hopefully, feel free to blur that out. But you and I have both been in that ecosystem. It's a very comprehensive and complex product, and the use cases shift so quickly that, I mean, you should understand the fundamentals of accounting and why a system that's fundamentally an accounting system first would have, or why your job would be so much easier if you understood basics of accounting. And maybe you don't understand FP&A, but you understand the reason why that's important and how it's used, because then it just becomes this disenfranchised like handoff. Like BDR qualifies a deal, you qualify a deal, you're checking boxes, then the SE or SC, is trying to kind of fill that gap of like expertise. And I think if you can become a trusted advisor early on in the sales cycle and then bring on an SC who can go into the weeds even deeper, you're just building a team for the client that they feel more and more comfortable with.
I mean, we always say it here on the podcast, people buy from people and people buy from people they like. So the sooner you can become somebody that they trust within a sales cycle, the more likely you are to be a person that they just genuinely like. I mean,
Yeah.
like the thing I would say is you don't ever have to be the person that knows everything. But if you're selling to finance professionals, like it's going to be important to know what are some of the challenges that they're faced with on a day-to-day basis and speak to those things. You don't have to necessarily know like the ins and outs of what a debit and credit is, but you need to be able to speak to why a debit and a credit's important. Or when they bring up something like an intercompany allocation or an amortization, you just know what that means You say, oh, okay, I've actually run into that before. I know in my head a rough idea of what it means. Maybe I don't know every last piece of detail around it or how my product solves for it, but that's where I'll loop in an SE. You know what? Actually, our product does that. When you meet with our SE, he'll actually speak about that or she'll speak about it. And I think that's important, is just to have enough understanding, because if not, like, again, you don't build the trust from the very beginning.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
And
what I'm hearing you both describe is strong AEs have like the functional knowledge or the practical knowledge of, the vertical you are in. And then they have a little bit of the product, just enough to bridge that gap between the SE who also has the product knowledge plus the functional knowledge. So that's where that overlap becomes. The BDR and the AE have a little bit of an overlap, and then the AE and SE have an overlap. So now you have the whole spectrum, and that's what really allows you to have people like you. People then think, oh, the AE actually knows what they're talking about because they understand my business. But if we want to get into the weeds of how the product does it, okay, the SE is the one that's doing that. But they all understand my business from an overall holistic perspective.
yeah, absolutely. And I think too, there's an internal qualitative side to knowing the product, because the relationship I'm having with my SC is going to be a much better relationship if we can talk about the product and it's not just me asking the same questions over and over again, not learning. Like the most complex products, really anything only has five, six, seven objections on your main feature to talking point or objection handling. So there's that where you can build better relationships because you're not just putting everything onto this person. And then I think too, if you think about just account executive, day to day, you're going out, you're prospecting, you're trying to pitch value, you love the product or you should love the product, and you're getting a lot of objection. Well, you like yourself a lot more when you understand the product, you like the product, you understand why it really drives value, versus just memorizing four or five key pain points it relieves, or key functions that key functionalities that really drive value. Once you understand that, your life becomes infinitely better as a salesperson when you understand the product and you like the product. I think is really something that is kind of a hack for account executives.
So basically, what I'm hearing you say here is when you figure out the value that your product actually brings, and you can bring the energy around what that value is from the very first call, it helps you sell more effectively.
When you know the product, believe it or not, it helps you sell more effectively. Yeah.
Who'd have thunk?
It's weird that we're even.
So what are some other things that you've seen for kind of like best practices as it relates to SE AE relationship? Like what are the qualities of the best relationships?
I think it's got to be transparent. And I think if everyone's doing everything right, meaning that the account executive or the sales organization is creating a big top of funnel, a lot of demand, a lot of demos, you then can run a proper deal cycle that's fairly emotionless, meaning that you're not worried because you've built enough of that pipeline to hit your number. Now you're not trying to make things fit where they don't fit. Once you have that and the sales engineer really understands how to demo, how to talk about their case studies and their use cases, and why features and functionalities are important, and can kind of navigate with the client, when those two things come together, you can have a lot more honest conversations about why customers are a good fit, why they're not, and you can work as a team. And until you really have both of those things coming in from both sides, you're not really an optimal you don't really have an optimal demo or like go to market strategy, I would say, because someone is always picking up the slack for the other person. You know, if I come in and I've only have one deal to close in October and it's really not a good fit, and I'm trying to pitch it to Samir as like a good fit, please make this a good fit. Even if he does it, it's never going to be great. But if we have that um, cohesiveness of like, he understands his role, I understand my role, and I'm holding up my end of the bargain, the sales engineer's role should become a lot easier, where we're having honest conversations, very transparent conversations. And I think that's when you really upgrade your relationship and the quality of your sale.
I love that. I think when you properly know whose job is what, it makes it very easy to then have that teamwork and that camaraderie. Kind of brings me to my next question of, you know, you're assigned a new SE, or you're going to be working with someone new. What's like the first thing or the first few things you do in order to build that relationship and build that camaraderie from an account executive perspective to your new SE, SC?
I think you just got to know them as a person. Like if I'm working with Ryan, if I'm working with Samir, let's have a conversation. Let's become actual peers and friends first, because we're going to be working together in high stress situations. You're going to leave your mic on when you go to the washroom. I'm going to force down your throat proof of concepts. We're going to hate each other otherwise. So, I mean, getting to know them on a personal level with really anyone you interact, intercompany or on your team. Two is making sure, like I said before, you hold up your end of the bargain, which means that you understand what the company does, why they're qualified, you've had good discovery. And I think at that point, you can sit down and walk them through everything. Because as an account executive, if you're trained correctly, you understand the gaps or the holes or the information you need to fill when talking to the sales engineer so they can do their job optimally. And then once you have that, that's really only when you can start talking strategy, because you need to know where you are with the client, why it's important. Then you can say, okay, well, usually, we do financials first here. Let's have a conversation about how we track fixed asset management or how they need forecasting, because that's what's really driving this. And then we're going to go back. But until you can kind of provide what they need, you shouldn't expect that they're going to be able to give better services to you in conjunction. I think you can only expect out of a sales engineer the quality of demo of the quality of information you bring before the demo.
Discovery, and more discovery. I mean, it's true, when sales engineers are equipped with the right kinds of information, they are able to do things in the demonstration that make it more impactful for somebody on the other side of the camera. I mean, I like to think of it as there's a great book called Made to Stick, and in it, it just talks about this idea of creating really, really sticky ideas. And I think about that from a demo perspective. So when I'm on a demo, I actually try to create these sticky ideas throughout. And I'll reiterate them a couple of times on the demo. So that way, after the call is over and they leave the Zoom call, they close their laptop up for the day, and a week goes by and they're thinking about Ryan. What are they thinking about that Ryan said? If they're just like thinking about the whole demo as a whole and it just didn't really relate to anything impactful, they just go, okay, I have a call with them again. I don't really know. Let me just, I don't know. I don't want to go attend that call. But if they think about you and they're going to have that next meeting on their calendar and they think, oh, you know what? When I spoke to Ryan, it was this, that, and this. Those are sticky ideas. If those sticky ideas are actually relating to the challenges that they face and it provides real value, guess who's getting on that next call? Guess who's showing up? Because that's a challenge too, right? In an AESE partnership, is that you're going to get meetings on your calendar for large demonstrations. You know what's going to happen every once in a while? The prospect no shows. All right, no show one, that's okay. You have a good relationship with you, okay, fine. No show number 5 or no show number 10, I'm going to start reaching back out to you and say, hey, you keep putting all these meetings on my calendar, but the prospect never shows up. Tell me why the prospect's not showing up.
Yeah.
And so it's important to make sure that you are conveying a real message. And that's the strategy piece of working together with your AE, because just hearing it from me alone is not enough for it to be a sticky idea. But guess what happens though? When Brent and Ryan are both saying the exact same kind of messaging throughout a whole entire call, they walk away with that sticky idea and they think about the two of you working together. Boom, sticky ideas there. They're willing to get on that call. They're not going to hit you with the no-show.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that comes back to, and maybe some of my answers are tied back to an idea of really an organization who understands what they're doing kind of hand in hand with SEs and account executives. But you should be pitching narratives. Like, I can't remember what website I was looking at, but we were looking to partner with them. And I was really trying to get an understanding of what their technology was. And for me, that's not, or I guess if you think about that, that's not a traditional buying behavior. I'm just not looking to see what a company does, or a buyer wouldn't. So when I went to their website, how do they have their information laid out. Well, it wasn't like solution, we do A, B, C, D, E. It was drop down menu. What is your role? What are you trying to achieve? And then you start, problem solving from that first intake. And I mean, if that's optimized for marketing, that should be how you're having conversations from the get go. So you can have this continuous narrative because you understand who the client is, typically what's important to them, just because you have clients like them. Or, we have Chat GPT. So I can go and say, what does a manufacturer for coffee in the Philippines need? You don't even have to get that specific, but my point is that with Chat GPT and these tools that we can leverage as a team, I can put together a business case 9 times out of 10 that will be relevant to my customer before I even talk to them. So if I understand most likely how their business works and why they're coming to us, and I understand the narrative of our platform or the service or good we're offering, then we should be able to have really, I want to say, credible and great conversations with them from the beginning. And I think that's what you need to strive for, is making everyone I don't want to say make everyone an or an SC or an SE, because I think typically people's personalities for sales and solution consultants or sales engineers are quite different, but
Mm-hmm.
very much the same in a way. But that's why you got to drive back to, do your BDRs, do your account executives know how to have a conversation about the product, what it does, why it's relevant, so that it's just not this cold handoff to an SE. And then, of course, if you can have better conversations early on, they're going to come to your meetings because you're provided value, you're a trusted advisor, and then you're just going to build on that relationship.
And I do think that's a perfect segue because today Brent actually challenged Samir and I to go take a personality test. So I want to get into that. But before we get into the personality test, Samir, I know in your current role, you've actually taken on more roles and duties of the account executive with your sales engineering background. And I know when you're doing your kinds of outreach, just through the conversations we've had, you focus more on this personalization aspect. So maybe if you just want to drop a few hints of knowledge around that, then we can get into the personality traits.
Yeah, I mean it's helpful when you understand your customers' problems, and you can really, I don't want to say pick at them. I heard a saying, it's sell the problem, not the solution, and that becomes very strong, where you can express that, "Oh, I know what your problem is. I've been there, and this is why." And then when you're like, I've been doing a lot of cold outreach, and there's a lot of like AI like crap out there, and so we spend the extra 2-3 minutes kind of looking on LinkedIn, if they're active on LinkedIn, if there's something that they recently posted, or there's something in their tagline, or they're part of some kind of group, and we'll bubble that up in our first outreach, being like, I found a lot of hits when I would put it in the PS. I would have my outreach, 3 to 5 sentences explaining the problem, why we solve it, who we are, and then a little PS of, oh, PS, I noticed you're in the Chicago area. Have you tried this restaurant? I think I did that with someone who was living in Toronto, actually, and I was like, oh, have you been to this oyster place? And he didn't respond to anything on my message. He responded to the PS. He's like, oh yeah, that oyster place is fantastic. And like,
Yeah.
that's how we ended up starting the conversation, and like got to a point where I actually was able to talk about my product. So that's it's one of the things that I've learned to do. Then I start thinking about my AEs who are doing outreach, and the SDRs and BDRs, and I'm like, damn, these guys are like hustling, because it's a numbers game, and you're just grinding, and you get like
Yeah.
99 no's and one yes, and that one yes feels so great, and then you get slammed with a bunch of more no's. So I gained a newfound respect for prospecting, and all that it takes.
As somebody who loves baseball, I think sales and baseball have so many similarities to it, right? Like the people that go to the Hall of Fame in baseball are people that get a hit one in every three at bats. If you are selling one in every three opportunities that you see, like you are not President's Club, like you are going to be a Hall of Fame salesperson. And I think there's just a lot of similarities to that, because you're going to face a lot of rejection. You're going to have a lot of strikeouts. You're going to have some times at the plate where like a fastball comes in and it's 10 feet outside, you still swing at it and you miss, and you're like, what am I doing here? And so I think there is a lot of similarities there. But yeah, I mean, it's a grind, right? It's a day-to-day grind. It's not for everyone, but I do think for the people that really enjoy sales, like it's a very rewarding career. It allows you to really get that competitive edge. Brent, I know you had tasked us with doing this personality test to basically see what are the similarities, what are the differences. So I want you to tell me what were the results of the test that you took.
Okay, I need to pull up mine quickly, but while I do that, you actually brought up a really good point, both of you. Um, I can't remember the book I read, but it was talking about authenticity and how authenticity, if you lead with that, even over positivity, there's like a higher frequency that you're you're putting out there. Before I go down this road, though, um, I think going back to your message, Samir, on LinkedIn is like, okay, well, if you hit him with, oh, hey, I've been in Toronto, I'm going to Toronto. What do you think about this oyster bar? And then what you were really after, or hey, I really hope you had a great day or a really great weekend. By the way, my name's Samir, I work here. And then you hit them with your pitch. It comes across inauthentic because you're just kind of putting something in the way of what you really want. But what I've read is that if you start out with a pretty pleasant and authentic outreach, and then anchor it with something very authentic to you, if you're a foodie, if you're a big basketball guy, whatever it is, typically the response rates just are astronomically higher. But I also think a very interesting conversation is, what does a professional salesperson look like versus a professional sales engineer? Because I think there are very few real professional sales people versus sales engineers. And what I mean by that is that if I bring you to a demo and you guys can't navigate the system, talk about the system, talk about why it's important, it's very, very obvious. And it's very easy to be a professional salesperson or a really great salesperson, but there isn't too many. And I mean, it's just like what you guys talked about. It's about having strong fundamentals in a very mundane day to day. And I had a sales manager one time way back in the day tell me that it's funny that we have 3 to 5 demos or 5 to 7 demos a week, relatively small time compared to your overall time working, and that very few teams actually practice demo, practice their pitch, who we are, what we do, why we help. Because if you think about it, the thing, and going back to an earlier point, professional baseball, they only play a couple hours a week. I mean, it's baseball, so they play lots of hours a week, but I mean, they have tons of time to perfect their craft. And I think that falls off on the sales side especially when we get to tap in people like sales engineers to really carry the load of the expertise.
Can you tell me more about what a great sales or a great professional salesperson looks like?
Yeah, I mean, what they look like is they're committed to the craft. So really, you understand who you're going after, who's your ideal client, what's important to them, why that's important. That's like 3 layers deep, where most people understand, like, hey, this is the product we sell, this is the features. And I think even if you look at that, that kind of dictates how you sell. So if I go back to what you guys were talking about, you can't have a great conversation about narrative, and cost benefit analysis and the ROI of a platform and why it's important to them in the next 5 to 10 years if you don't really understand 3 layers deep of the organization or the customer or the problem you're trying to solve. Where if you only really understand the platform at a surface level, what kind of story are you going to tell? Like, what kind of people are going to be coming into the door? You're probably way too generic to understand what a good person or a good prospect looks like, and you're probably way too generic to build trust to get that really good prospect in the door. So I think that's probably why a lot of people fail. And then that's like core. And then if you take it any further, it's really just time blocking. Okay, I'm going to call for an hour, or I'm going to have 35 conversations, or I'm going to make sure that I'm moving these deals upwards or outwards or continue the conversation. The actual day to day is very mundane. If you can deal with the emotional side and the professional side of development, is where you really get those margins coming in.
Very interesting to me. I think like the biggest takeaway to me is like, when it comes to sales, especially for like the more traditional salesperson, and as it relates to sales engineers too, I think it's really a lot about just constantly doing a lot of the little things right. Doing the outreach, staying up to date on the outreach. I think sometimes like what I've seen before is that salespeople can get really caught up in just the metrics of it all. hey, I'm supposed to do 100 outreach emails. They just do the 100 outreach emails versus actually focusing on the 100 outreach emails that are going to make a difference. And so like it can't just be a numbers game. It's just about doing the little things right over and over and over again. And if you practice what you do and you keep on practicing, those moments in the game, those are the times you get the hits. When you get the hits, that's when you get the sales. And so I think it really is just like do a lot of little things right, and eventually you're the one hitting home runs.
Yeah, I think it's honestly more mental because if you think about the whole concept of you hire a BDR for 40, 50, $60,000 depending on the market, and in that same organization and in that same career progression, they can 10x that 40,000 to 400,000 in 5 to 7 years if they're very structured with what they learn, or if they're pretty smart with maybe career pivots. It's hard to convince someone that such minor and repetitive tasks stacking for exponentially will pay you 10x and make you a top earner in your area likely. And it's really just that buy-in of, okay, I'm making $40,000 right now. What does my lifestyle look like? What does my assets look like? How do I live life, or the opportunity to live life at this level? Getting them over that mental barrier, because once one thing I've noticed is once you see a salesperson make $200,000 or $300,000 the first time, unless a market dips or changes or a platform, crowd strike happens, um, they're typically going to make that again because they have removed that mental barrier that, I don't make 100 grand anymore. I make 200 grand. And the only thing really stopping me is my level of effort every day and how I show up. Um, is kind of a weird construct too, because it's like, how do you really sell someone on you can make $40,000 in 5 to 6 years? You're going to be making 400,000 if you stick to the fundamentals.
You actually bring up something so funny that I have to tell this story. So somebody had reached out to me on LinkedIn once upon a time, and they were like a friend of a friend, and they're like, hey, I'm really looking to get into sales. Like, can we chat? Of course, I'm like, all right, fine, let's go ahead. Let's get on that call. Right. We do a virtual cup of coffee, and I'm talking to this individual, and they're like, yeah, I want to be in sales. I'm like, oh, okay, what part do you want to be in? Sales engineering? Well, I want to be in sales. I'm like, okay, why do you want to be in sales? Well, I know they make a lot of money, so like I want to do that. And I'm like, okay, tell me more, right, about what you're doing today. They were doing something entirely different. So we're going back and forth. They're like, yeah, I just want to make a lot of money. I'm like, well, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go become a BDR. You're not going to make a lot of money at first. But if you do a lot of little things right, 2 years later, you could be an account executive. If you end up in the right situation where 2 years you're doing the right things, 2 years later, you're an account executive. You're starting to sell in your career. And then 5 to 7 years later, you're starting to make the big bucks. But just to let you know, right, and I was reiterating this, I'm like, not every single salesperson out there is making $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, why do you think we're going to meet today and you're going to be a $500,000 salesperson overnight? And they just assume that they could just go get a sales job and become a $500,000 earner. And I'm like, look, that's not how this thing works. You have got to go through the hardships and the learning to actually get to the point of selling deals and making that kind of money. Not every single salesperson is making that kind of money. Only the top 1 or 2% of salespeople are making that money. And the only reason why they're making that money is because they're the ones that are relentless in their pursuit to actually make the money. Whether that's because it's money driven or it's because it's, personal driven or personal growth driven, whatever it is, but it's only the best of the best that are doing those things. Few and far between is there a salesperson that really doesn't know what they're doing that's making $500,000 a year. And that was just one of the most frustrating virtual cups of coffee I was having. And I walked away from it and I'm like, look, I don't think sales is for you. Like, honestly, like I would tell you, I just don't think it is. You don't want to put in the work. You're not going to get there. You just want to be a $500,000 earner overnight. I don't know. Looks like you're going to have to like win the lottery.
Yeah. But you bring up a good point because it's like, think about organizational efficiency of like a mom and pop shop, a startup, Amazon, the biggest organizations in the world. What other department do you have where you have three people sitting beside each other given the same training, and they have variable incomes that are wildly different because one person in, CA is bringing in 1.7 million a year, the other person is struggling to close 300, the other person is closing 250, and management is still kind of scratching their head. I think that is why we see kind of like the sunshine and rainbows around a go-to-market AI solution, because you get to run perfect follow-up, you get to run perfect sales cycles, perfect pitches. It's interesting in that concept because really it is such a leaky bucket for organizations who, like, you would never find that in any other department really, with such a variable across your different kind of people or mechanisms of output in a way.
I mean, and that's why there's so much churn in being an AE. Like, if you're not making your number in 2 quarters, you're out. It's just like
Yeah.
it's very cutthroat, like very black or white. You know, you either hit your number, you don't hit your number. You don't hit your number 2 times or 3 times in a row, and it's time to go find another gig. Like, you're not gonna last.
Yeah, it's wild. It's definitely a lot of commitment, that's for sure.
And like I said, it's not for everyone. It's really for the people that really want it for whatever that reason is. But if you want to become that $500,000 seller, like it's not for everyone. And it's really going to be the people that do the right things all of the time. So I know we're coming up here at the end of our podcast today. Were you able to get it pulled up, your results of the personality test?
I was.
Okay, all right.
Do you have a
I
drum
mean, I don't
roll?
know if you want a drum roll or not. I can't pipe in the drum roll yet. I don't know if maybe Riverside can help us out with the sound effect there. But
Nice.
tell us, what were the results of your test?
So I had ENTJ, which is commander, which just
Okay,
breaks down to extroverted, intuitive thinking, and judging.
Samir, what did you have?
I had ENFP, which is campaigner, and that breaks down as extroverted, intuitive, feeling, prospecting, and assertive.
Okay, and myself, I landed in the same bucket as Brent. I was an ENTJ, also a commander. And honestly, like we did this, and I'm reading through the results of this thing. I've never felt so personally attacked, but also heard at the same time with these results.
Yeah.
I thought they were like so spot on with some of the different critiques that they had around my personality. But I do think that the results are quite interesting here. Brent, I mean, what do you think a salesperson needs to be? I mean, I would obviously like step one is you got to be extroverted, but what other traits do you think are important?
Yeah. I mean, if you go to a different type of test, there's like the big five personality traits. And I mean, I think you need to be somewhat extroverted. I know there's been like a lot of pushback on like, are introverts great at selling? And I think there are. I think regardless of what you are, kind of like predeposition to your personality, you can build systems and habits around kind of picking up what's lacking. Really, it depends. It's funny because you're like, what is a good salesperson? I think it depends on where they are and what they're selling. Because someone who's selling an ERP solution is going to be vastly different from someone who sells payment processing. That's kind of a sales velocity of a week or 2 weeks. I don't know if that's accurate. So don't pick me apart in the comments when you sell payment processing, or like 6 months in an ERP cycle. I think those people are radically different within the salesperson personality.
Okay, that is interesting. No, I think to everyone listening, grill Brent in the comments
Yeah.
if you can around what the sales cycle looks like for payment processing. That's a good call. And I've actually never really thought about that because you're right. The different types of technologies that we sell will actually have to have longer or shorter sales cycles, which mean you're probably going to have different personalities for both. I would actually imagine somebody that can be like a crossover of like an introvert extrovert for those longer sales cycles is probably a little bit more beneficial because it helps you establish more of the relationship, but you're not overbearing. Whereas like in a 1 or 2 week sales cycle, like you probably want like the super overbearing person that's just like hounding you every hour of being like, hey, like we're supposed to come to a conclusion on a deal here in the next 48 hours versus like, on a long, 12-month sales cycle, like you probably want the person that's just like, hey, just checking in. I know it's been a couple of weeks. How are you doing? But hey, if I don't hear from you, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, right? Like that probably works a little bit better.
Yeah. And I think too, you probably find those people as account managers in that fast moving sales cycles organization. People who can land the deal really quick because, maybe they're making decision around functionality, pricing, and it's pretty cut and dry. And then you have a product portfolio to upsell them. And then that's where you need what maybe a traditional account executive at a larger organization with larger deal cycles would have a strength at, which is nurturing, understanding, building a use case, building rapport for the long term, which is kind of interesting because I mean, I don't think anyone's really figured that out.
I've seen like all sorts of very successful account executives, those who are almost like relationship driven, where they like get really good relationships with the buying team, like really earn their trust and therefore like are able to get the deal. Then you have almost like the more like technical account executives who like really understand like the functionality and like the business value behind it, and they're like almost more tactical and uh, dare I say like robotic at times, where they just like
Yeah.
they just know their shit, and like that's like quite the spectrum. And then something that what you guys were saying, it was like the difference between like a car salesman, where they're getting that deal like in a couple hours, like you have to be one type of personality
Yeah.
versus like someone who is a 2 year deal cycle. You're gonna need very much different strengths to lean on, and like patience levels and things like that. So I think that is an excellent point of depending on what you're selling and like who you're selling to can dictate like the energy level of being extroverted or introverted or whatever it is. Interesting thing between the three of us that we're all extroverted and we're all intuitive. So we have like those first two like
Yeah.
the same, which I found was like pretty interesting. But we Ryan and I get along very well, so I'm sure Brent and I would also get along very well if we ever meet each other in person.
The
Yeah.
one thing I wish I could fix, out of the ENTJ profile is the perfectionist piece. I swear I'm working on it, but man, it feels like, a constant work in progress on the perfectionist mindset of it all. Like you want everything to be perfect, especially like when it comes to my demo. Sometimes I get so lost in the idea of trying to perfect the demo that it becomes so inauthentic. And I think, the one thing I would say to any salesperson here is find your own authentic voice, whatever that voice is. If you're the extrovert that's crazy and wants to just be loud and crazy and extroverted, that's you. That's your authentic sales style. Be that person. You're the introverted extrovert. Be that person. You're an introvert tactical seller. Be that person. Don't ever try to be something that you're not, because people always buy from people. And if they feel that you're authentic, they're not going to buy from you.
And I think that goes back to knowing the product and understanding the value, because then when you're engaging with people, you're not worried about, do I know what I'm talking about? What if they talk about this and this and this? And I don't really know, I won't say objection handling, but whatever that exchange or discourse is, if you're constantly thinking about that, you can never be your authentic self because it just takes up too much bandwidth of how you're trying to engage with the people, I think.
The selling from desperation, right? Or selling from the sense of always thinking about the outcome of what will happen. I need to close a deal this month. This has to be the deal that I close. If you're thinking and feeling those things and you're letting them drive you, guess what's happening to the people on the other side of the call? They're feeling those things. You have to really sit down and understand what somebody's challenges are and be there with them every step of the way through this like consultative sales process, especially if you're in longer sales. It's more important to do those kinds of things. But if you're always focused on outcome, 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 and you get lost in it, it's just people can feel those kinds of things.
And it's almost worse when you're in a complex sales cycle because you're trying to push everything that you just talked about through, and you really don't have the open mindedness to work with your sales engineer to say, like, hey, we are a direct fit for this need of theirs, or this feature won't work for what they're looking for, but we know the system so well. Where is the workaround? Where can we integrate to? Like, you're just in a better state of mind and you can help people. Like, how are you going to help people if you don't know what you're even bringing to the party, in a way?
Exactly. I know we're kind of pushing it right now, but wanted to ask Brent if you were to leave the audience with, one piece of advice. Maybe I'm trying to get into sales, or I'm in it and trying to improve, or I'm struggling with my SE and kind of open the floor. What would be something you'd want to leave with the viewers before you say goodbye?
I would say try to look at it from the SC's or the sales engineer's shoes. take that, understand your product, and then build the relationship. Yeah, I think as long as you're excited about the product and understand it a little bit and can build a great relationship with your sales engineer, it'll definitely optimize and help you close more deals.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Maybe the
Mhm.
new title of the episode. I don't know. I mean, that seems to be a good takeaway. Well, Brent, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing the knowledge that you have. It's been great chatting about these things and hope to have you on at some other time, but appreciate you coming.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Talk to you
Yeah,
later.
thank you. All right, Samir, as always, give me your thoughts.
I saw a lot of like similarities from, when we had the episode of how to train your AE, and we talked about relationship building and like the value of that. His answer when I asked, what do you do when you first meet an SE was, build a relationship, learn them who they are as a person. And I was like, wow, it's very spot on. And it's like, there's a lot of things that are very similar for both sides, him describing, I really liked how he described if an AE really understands the domain and like the functional side of the product and just has a little bit of product knowledge, it's enough of the overlap for them to be like, oh yes, I understand your pain, I understand why it happens, I know our product does this, my SE Ryan will be able to dive deeper and show you exactly how they do it. And then you guys have that congruency of message because you both know that functional side, and now you like tie each other together. So I thought that was like, it was very refreshing to hear from an AE perspective that the top professional sellers are those who really understand that piece.
I also just really like that we had somebody on that truly like understands and values the role of a sales engineer and why it's so important to actually create that partnership
Mm-hmm.
with sales engineering. It just feels like to me personally, right? It's like hearing those kinds of things make me want to right now and make me want to right now for Brent go the extra mile, right? If Brent were to come to me and say, you know what, Ryan, I need a demo tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., I'd be like, I'm pretty fired up. Like, I'm willing to go do that for you because you're the type of AE that, kind of lifts me up in the way that says, of course, I want to help you. Of course, I want to join that extra call and make sure that we sell this together. And it's like that sort of partnership is what sets apart, I think, the best team sellers, right? It's like you have to create that kind of bond together. You can't create that bond if you devalue one over the other. You're the SE that's like, oh no, I don't really feel like my AE does a lot. Or if you're the AE that's like, I don't really feel like my SE does a lot. Those are never going to be super successful partnerships together. And so you want the ones that understand, like, here's the role you play, here's the role I play. And when we do those things really well together, like, we sell a lot of software, we sell a lot of whatever it is that we do.
Yeah, I really like that. It's like both parties are bringing something to the table. There's been like a lot of times in my career where I've worked with AEs where I feel like they haven't really brought anything to the table and they're just like leaning on me to do
Mhm.
everything outside of organizing the calls. So when he, expressed that, like, I am bringing stuff to the table, when we do better discovery, that means my SE's demo is going to be better, which means that the likelihood of closing that deal is higher. Like when you have that understanding as an AE, it just makes it way more fun for us as SEs to work with you. And his like parting thought of put yourself in your SE shoes, you know, chef's kiss. Like I wouldn't have said it better myself.
I do think one thing that sales engineers can do better is put yourself in the shoes of your AE, right? They're under a lot more stress than you
Yeah.
are. Sometimes it's hard for them not to be focused on the outcomes because there are these quotas that have to be hit. And so as an SE, you want to partner with your AE better, put yourself in their shoes. Think about the stress that they might be under to get those deals across the line. And again, when you start doing those kinds of things, that's the best kind of partnership. And those are the people you really want to work with. Those are the people that will go the extra mile for you.
Something tangible that's helped me, and you know this is all about how comfortable you are, is I've actually talked about kind of my comp separation with my AE because they've been like, oh, how's like your incentives, and then we both understand what each other's incentives are, so we both understand what's at stake for the other person, and that really helped me understand, like, really put it into perspective how much stress they are under, because like it's not only closing the deal, it's literally like financial stress. Like if I don't, like sometimes it can be, if I don't close this deal this quarter, I can't pay my mortgage, or like I can't support my family. Like it becomes very stressful. But if you don't know, it's impossible for you to understand and try to put yourself in their position. So I think that's a really great point as well. Like SCs, talk to your AEs, see what their incentives are. Like you don't need to talk numbers explicitly, but even ratios like can help you understand the difference between a 50-50 and a 70-30 is, quite a, it could be at least tens of thousands of dollars.
It's a pretty cool point to add in there. It's actually something I have not done, but I could see there being a lot of real value around that. Especially like imagine a deal that's like huge, huge number, right? And you as the SE, you put in tons and tons and tons of work. You don't necessarily get comped out on that deal the way that your AE does. And if your AE understands that, then maybe your AE sends you a nice little gift basket that says, "Hey, I really appreciate all the hard work that you put in on this." You do that for your SE. Guess what? The next time you have another deal that size, guess who's going to put in all the work for you to make sure that we drive more deals forward, right? And just even understanding that on a human level, I think is helpful. So Samir, you gave me a new idea and a new thing that I think like got to bring to the partnership.
Absolutely. I think I've read recently like tip your SEs. It's kind of funny, but it also has some like it has some truth to it. So like these AEs have that conversations with each other. It'll only help you understand your partner better, which will only help you close more deals and at the end of the day, put more money in each other's pockets. So any final thoughts? Otherwise we'll wrap, Ryan.
No, that's it from my end. Awesome conversation today with Brent and excited for our future episode 12.
Yeah.
I'm ready to talk about the next thing, but thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, I know some people have reached out to us regarding episode topics. If you have things we want to discuss, feel free to shoot us a DM because some of the things you guys have talked about or asked us is on the docket and we're super excited to get in it. So if there's anything that you're curious about or want us to dive deeper into, you can find us on LinkedIn, shoot us an email, and we will talk to you guys next time.
All right. See you, everyone.
Later.